Hey, what's going on, everybody? So, this is going to be another video about the Blonde Ghost Network, and today we're going to be focusing on Ernest Keiser, who was actually a con man who helped take down Edwin Wilson. Um, so, I'm going to play a little bit of um, a TV show called Betrayal, episode 106, I think, or episode 1, season 1, episode 6, about Edwin Wilson. It's a pretty good little TV series. You can actually watch it for free on Tubi, but also right here on YouTube. So I'm going to play this and kind of give you a little background about who this Ernest Kaiser person is before I read some of the articles about him, because I wanted to kind of get some of these kind of smaller yet important kind of side characters kind of out the way. Um, so yeah, so let me get started.
To trap Ed Wilson, the Justice Department and the U.S. Marshal Service teamed up to enlist the unique talents of Ernie Keiser, a self-confessed con artist.
Ernie Keiser was slender, dapper, very verbally facile guy of indeterminate origin. He was German, or maybe he was Austrian, could have been Brazilian, possibly Chilean. He'd sort of been a little bit of everything.
Keiser was an incredibly adept liar. I mean, he could sit there, and I remember one incident, which I tell often. I said, Ernie, don't tell me you were born in the Bronx. Here's your picture in a German army uniform. And he says, in his accent, he says, well, that's not me, that's my twin brother. And very clearly, it wasn't his twin brother, because we knew it wasn't, but he was trying to get citizenship at the time, and that was one of the motivators. I said, Ernie, don't tell me you were born in the Bronx. Here's your picture in a German army uniform. And he says, in his accent, he says, well, that's not me, that's my twin brother. And very clearly, it wasn't his twin brother, because we knew it wasn't, but he was trying to get citizenship at the time, and that was one of the motivators for him helping us.
There was no question he was a smooth con man. Over the course of the next few months, we developed this plan to try to, in essence, work Keiser into Wilson.
About that time is when Ernie Keiser comes on the scene. Keiser identified himself and told me that he was with the National Security Council, and he would like for me to introduce him to Ed and get him in to see Ed because he had a proposal from the National Security Council.
Keiser put an offer on the table that could potentially solve all of Ed Wilson's problems.
The deal had to do with an operation that the National Security Council wanted Ed to run, and that it was going to be in the Dominican Republic, and Ed was the only guy to do it. And if Ed was willing to come out and run this operation and make it successful, that would result in all of the charges against being dismissed.
Wilson's attorney was highly suspicious of Keiser's credentials and decided to call his bluff.
I got up and looked out the window down at Connecticut Avenue, and I said, I'll tell you what we'll do. You and I are going to go downstairs right now. We'll get in a taxi cab and we'll go to the National Security Council, and you take me and introduce me to the gentleman who's authorized you to make this offer, and I'll see that you're sitting in Ed Wilson's living room in 3 days. Oh, no, I can't do that. This is all terribly secret and everything else. And I said, yeah, I can see how secret it is. And at the point, I ushered him out of my office and didn't speak to him again. And I called Ed that night, and I said, if you hear anything from the guy, ignore him. Well, within a couple of days, Keiser had gotten to Ed.
Keiser gained Ed Wilson's confidence by pitching his proposal directly to Wilson.
Ed's sitting in Libya. He's telling Keiser he wants out. Keiser's telling us, and I say, tell Keiser, tell Ed that you have bought off all the officials in the Dominican Republic, and that if he flies to the Dominican Republic, he's safe. Keiser tells us to Ed Wilson. Ed Wilson says, fine, but I need a visa. Keiser picks up the passport, delivers it to me. I fly down to the Dominican Republic, where the Dominican military and I had a relationship. A general friend of mine in the Dominican military. In fact, at the time, the commander-in-chief of the Dominican Armed Forces gets a valid visa stamped in Ed Wilson's phony Irish passport.
Ernie Keiser returned to Libya to present Wilson with his newly stamped passport.
Ed Wilson is then convinced that he has in fact bought off the officials in the Dominican Republic.
I said, Ed, listen, you can't leave Libya at this point. I don't care what this guy Keiser tells you. It's a trap. You're being set up.
Ignoring his lawyer's advice, Wilson left Libya together with Ernie Keiser.
Ed thinks he's going to the Dominican Republic to get drunk, get laid, and meet with the National Security Council. Basically.
Ed wanted out of Libya so bad he was willing to believe just about anything anybody would tell him that indicated that he was going to be able to get out of Libya. And it was the old term, a con man conning a con man.
When Wilson and Keiser boarded a connecting flight in Zurich, they were joined by two undercover U.S. Marshals who shadowed Wilson to the Dominican Republic.
The plane lands in Santo Domingo, the Dominican Republic. Keiser is with him. Our surveillance team is following both of them. Ernie Keiser goes through immigration without problem. Ed Wilson gets to immigration. Our general friend is waiting there. He looks at Ed Wilson's passport. He says, your papers are not in order.
Next thing they know, they said, okay, sir, we're going to escort you out. He said, no, I'm here for a meeting. No, sir, you're going to be leaving.
Well, Wilson says, well, I want to go back to Libya. And my general friend says, you're an American. You're going back to America. Puts him on a Dominicana flight, nonstop to JFK. We have two marshals on the plane with him. As soon as the plane lands, they place him under arrest, and Ed Wilson is ours. The day after he was arrested, I fly up to New York. I walk into the facility where we have Ed, and I say, hello, Ed, how you doing? Welcome home. And he gets up and he says, it's all a mistake. He says, we'll all be laughing about this in a couple of weeks.
Ed was insisting that Keiser had a deal set up for him, and he didn't need me, he didn't need anybody. He had this thing all worked out, and as soon as Keiser talked to the right people, he was going to be released that very day.
Several hours after his arrest at Kennedy Airport, Wilson was arraigned in a federal court in Brooklyn on charges including conspiracy to commit murder, transporting explosives, and acting as an agent for the government of Libya. His bail was set at $20 million.
And of course, as the day wore on, it finally started to sink into Ed that, in fact, Keiser had played him for a sucker.
After being caught in the government's trap, Wilson became the
It's different than the kind of acts of
After being caught in the government's trap, Wilson became the focus of one of the biggest grand jury investigations in history. Wilson was indicted on a variety of sensational charges, including gun running and selling 40,000 pounds of explosives to Libya. While he was awaiting trial on the explosive shipment, Wilson's case took a bizarre twist.
He's being held at the Federal Detention Center in Manhattan. I get a call one day that I need to come over to the Justice Department.
Okay, so that kind of gives you a little background about who this Ernst Keiser person was, right? So there's a couple articles, and I think this is actually from the UPI, but I found it on the CIA's website. It's just for free. It's publicly available. So let me blow this up for you a little bit. All right. So CIA agent or conman, Keiser by Andrew Bloom, Merioneth, New York. So Ernst Keiser has been described as an undercover intelligence agent, a professional con artist, and a mystery man who exists in a quote-unquote bizarre world. Keiser, 65, helped the federal government lure renegade CIA agent Edwin Wilson from Libya in 1982. Besides trapping Wilson, Keiser claimed to be working on capturing fugitive financier Robert Vesco and had offered help in finding Nazi criminal Joseph Mengele. Keiser has been missing from his Northern Virginia home since January 31st and is believed to have jumped $5,000 bail, authorities say. There's no question in my mind he jumped bail, said Westchester, New York County Assistant Prosecutor Tony Burke. Finding him is not imminent. I am not sure that anyone outside of his home immediate I am not sure that anyone outside of his immediate family knows who he is, said former federal prosecutor Chris Hoyer. He exists and functions in a bizarre world. Hoyer said there were too many strange stories from the man, who spoke with a German accent. The mention of Kaiser's name prompted one of his neighbors to say, "We don't discuss Ernst Keiser, sorry." Burke, who called Keiser a professional con artist, has sought to have $5,000 bail forfeited after Keiser was convicted of land fraud in White Plains, New York, in the belief Keiser would vanish. Judge Gerard Delaney, who continued bail despite Burke's argument, noted noticed Kreiser's rather colorful background, but said federal authorities would have taken Keiser to Florida anyway for another trial. In all probability, I was going to find him rather than put him in jail, added Delaney. He's in his 60s, and I didn't want to saddle taxpayers with his care. Uh, Keiser's attorney, William Ehrenwald, acknowledged Keiser's intelligence work, but called him a businessman. Keiser had been ordered to report to Ehrenwald every 3 days. He last spoke to the attorney January 28th, and a few days later left his home in McLean, Virginia, a Washington suburb, with his wife, Bahira, and mother-in-law, Margaret uh, Dimashiki, or Damaki. When Keiser failed to attend a pre-sentencing meeting in White Plains and the Florida trial, warrants were issued. His wife is also being sought. Family clothing, cars, dogs, and bank accounts were nowhere to be seen, and officials speculated the family has fled the country. So this Kreiser guy seems to have gotten, this was in 1985 or whatnot. So, and I want to say this was after he helped set up Edwin P. Wilson. So he was kind of a weird guy in and of himself too. So then there's another article. So the man who helped lure fugitive back to the U.S. is shot in McLean. This is from 1984. So this is after the other article. A 65-year-old McLean man who was targeted for assassination after helping lure a fugitive former CIA agent into the hands of U.S. authorities has been shot and wounded outside a McLean restaurant, authorities said yesterday. The victim's wife said the assailant took a briefcase, and a lawyer for the wounded man said the case contained sensitive documents concerning work for the federal government. Ernest Keiser, who was put on a hit list after helping persuade Edwin P. Wilson to leave the safety of Libya, and had, according to his attorney, been involved in efforts to return fugitive financier Robert Vesco to American jurisdiction, was shot in the right side Sunday night. Fairfax County Police said Keiser was shot about 10:50 p.m. in the parking lot of Charlie's Place at 6930 Old Dominion Drive. They said he was wounded after he left the restaurant to retrieve something from his parked car. Keiser's wife, Bibi, what is interesting, so his wife's name is Bibi. If we go back over here, her name was, gotcha, his wife's real name is Bahira, and her last name is Demaki, but they call her Bibi. So Bibi is her kind of like, I hate to say the term, but the kind of pet name, love name, whatever. I don't know. I don't know the politically correct term. But so Keiser, whose wife Bibi said her husband was in the real estate business, was listed in satisfactory condition Wednesday at Fairfax Hospital. Police said his room was under guard. Although Keiser's wife did not specify the contents of the briefcase she said was taken from her husband, Keiser's attorney, William I. Ehrenwald, said it contained documents when one of the documents he was told were related to work he's done for the government. He declined to give details. Police would neither confirm nor deny that a briefcase was taken. Keiser was to have gone on trial yesterday in White Plains, New York on a grand larceny charge. He was also under a federal obstruction of justice indictment in Tampa, Florida, according to Ehrenwald. So that corroborates the two other cases in the other article. And I guess that White Plains grand larceny charge had to do with land fraud. So Keiser's cooperation with the government in sensitive matters figured in pretrial negotiations in the New York case and is connected to the defense he expected to make in Florida, according to the lawyer. I don't think I really know enough at this point to say what the full scope of the thing is, said Fairfax County prosecutor Robert F. Horan Jr. In 1982, a knowledgeable official said that Keiser had worked for 8 months in an elaborate scheme to get former CIA agent Wilson back from Libya. Wilson had been under federal indictment accusing of providing terrorist training and equipment and explosives to Libyan ruler Colonel Muammar Gaddafi. Keiser once described himself as an old friend of Wilson. Wilson was eventually sentenced to 32 years in prison on charges of conspiring to send weapons and explosives to Libya or Libyan agents, after being indicted on charges of offering $1.2 million for the assassination of 2 prosecutors and 6 other persons, including Keiser. Wilson was convicted in New York City last year for trying to murder all 8. Officials said Wilson is being held at a maximum security federal prison in Marion, Illinois. Harold Price Faringer, who was at once Wilson's attorney, said last night that he was no longer authorized to speak for him, but added that I can't imagine that Wilson was connected with the shooting of Keiser. So Ehrenwald said Keiser was to have gone on trial yesterday on a charge of having obtained about $450,000 from someone in New York by various false representations. He said that Keiser was confident of acquittal and that the Justice Department had asked that the charge be dismissed based on Keiser's prior cooperation with the government and based upon his ongoing cooperation with the government in a number of sensitive matters. In the Tampa case, Ehrenwald said Keiser and others were charged with trying to get money from someone under indictment in Florida on the promise they would be able to quote unquote fix his case with the Justice Department. The lawyer said Keiser had made no offer to fix the case and has pleaded not guilty. In the court of the trial, he said, I'm sure the government will have to concede Mr. Keiser was indeed involved in government efforts to obtain jurisdiction over Vesco, now believed to be out of the country avoiding extradition on fraud charges. Justice Department officials declined to comment on Ehrenwald's statements. So Keiser helps bust Wilson. Then he gets caught up. So, and Keiser gets caught up in two court cases, whatnot. One for grand larceny in White Plains, and another for a kind of like, you'd almost say kind of like bribery. Kind of, I don't really know what the charges would be, but he promised to get somebody out of trouble in Florida and took their money allegedly or whatnot. But federal prosecutors said he was still working with them on a couple things, but one of those things he was working on was with Robert Vesco, and I don't really know who that is, so I'm gonna look that guy up. But as we do that, let me pause real quick. Okay, so let me get this article out the way. This is from the LA Times. Let me blow it up for you. So this is from 1985, January 20th, 1985. So Ernest Keiser, the businessman who lured renegade CIA agent Edwin Wilson back to the United States, was convicted in White Plains, New York, of second-degree grand larceny in issuing a false financial statement. Keiser, 65, is to be sentenced February 19th. He was convicted of swindling $415,000 from New York investor John Ferris in 1980 by falsely claiming to own 200 acres of land near Orlando. Interesting. That he was going to develop. In 1982, Keiser helped the Justice Department lure Wilson from Libya with a guarantee of safety. Wilson was convicted of conspiracy and firearms violation in connection with weapon sales to Libya and for smuggling explosives to Libya. So wow. So in 1982, Keiser helps bring down Wilson basically by luring him from Libya, alleging that he can help him, I guess, by luring him to the Dominican Republic on the grounds that he has like a job from the National Security Council or something for him. Wilson ignores his lawyer, goes there. Wilson's later detained and then extradited back to the United States. That's 1982. But it looks like by 1985, Keiser, being kind of a con artist, ends up getting in trouble. So this is 82. Then I think if we go down to this one article was from 85. This article, I want to say, was also from 84. Wow, so he's shot in 84, which makes sense because that's kind of around the time they actually find Wilson guilty, I believe. So let me see here. Gotcha. Wow. Very interesting. Just looking here real quick. So let me go back to this article. Burke, Burke, who called Keiser a professional con artist, has sought to have $5,000 bail forfeited after Keiser vanished, was convicted of land fraud in White Plains. So the judge, however, didn't actually want to like put him in jail. He just wanted to fine the guy or whatever. But it looks like he skipped out on that and was like never really seen again or whatever. So who knows? Like wow. So he lures in Wilson. He later gets shot. He gets involved in some dirty dealings in White Plains, New York, and Florida, and kind of just vanishes after that from like the annals of time. So there's that. But there's another article right here. Nope. All right, sorry about that. All right, so CIA drops documents on spy who escaped justice in White Plains, New York. And this was actually written in 2017. So let's see what the updates are on Mr. Keiser, if that is his real name. So remember when a shadowy figure who may or may not have had Nazi connections and been a spy was charged with larceny in Westchester but escaped justice never to be seen again? So the CIA remembers. Every year, the Central Intelligence Agency dumps quarterly century-old records into a searchable database in accordance with a 2000 executive order signed by then President Barack Obama. Among the troves of 25-year-old documents released in December was a series of news reports maintained by the CIA concerning a man known as Ernest Keiser. Little is known for certain about Keiser. His name might have been Ernest or Ernesto Keiser or von Keiser, and in 1985 he was thought to be between 63 and 70 years old. He spoke with a German accent. Let's make sure my volume's looking good here. Yes, we are. All right. So this is a photo of the attorney that we've been hearing about in the other articles. So that's attorney William Ehrenwald, seen in 2012. Ehrenwald defended Ernst Keiser against real estate fraud allegations in 1985. Keiser jumped bail and fled the country. So I'm not sure that anyone outside of his immediate family knows who he is, former federal prosecutor Chris Hoyer said in 1985. He exists and functions in a bizarre world. So we don't know. Based on the news reports from the time kept by the CIA that Keiser was convicted in White Plains Superior Court of swindling a Marionette real estate developer out of $450,000 in a Florida land deal. So William Ehrenwald, the White Plains attorney Keiser hired to defend him, said in a recent interview that it was a garden variety fraud case, but called it unique for reasons he would not divulge. There was some other ramifications, some of which or all of which may not be in the public record, that I can't speak to, he said. There were some aspects of the case that were very unique that were unrelated to the charges against him. Against the wishes of prosecutors, Judge Gerard Delaney released Keiser on bail before sentencing, largely because, this is me talking now because of the other articles, because of his age. He didn't want him just rotting in jail as an old person. You got to pay for the medical bills, etc., right? So prosecutors had planned to ask Delaney to impose jail time, calling Keiser a flight risk, but his attorney was arguing for leniency, asking the judge to consider his client's service to the United States. Keiser had sought out and returned rogue CIA agent Edwin Wilson from Libya at the behest of intelligence authorities, Ehrenwald told Delaney in 1985. Wilson allegedly responded by hiring a hitman to murder Keiser, who was shot but not killed. Wilson, accused of illegally selling weapons to Libya, was sentenced to 60 years in prison but was released in 2004 when it was discovered that the Department of Justice and the CIA had withheld evidence in the case. He died in 2012. Keiser also had been trying to bring fugitive financier Roberto Vesco to justice. Ehrenwald said then and had been asked to seek out Dr. Joseph Mengele, a Nazi doctor wanted for war crimes who thought to be hiding in South America. So wow, that even kind of connects even to this. So then that connects to even like all the rat line Latin America stuff, right? So then U.S. Attorney Rudy Giuliani wrote to Westchester prosecutors on Keiser's behalf. What? What? That is wild. That is crazy. There was substantial and heroic cooperation by Mr. Keiser with federal authorities. What? Huh. Okay, I got to pause real quick. Alright, so let me see here. So in the recent interview, Aaron Wall said he cannot go into greater detail whether he may have been doing or not doing on behalf of the government or not. I can't really answer that. On January 28, 1985, Aaron Wall assured Delaney, and other judge in Florida where Keiser was facing similar charges, that his client would be in White Plains in time for court. But by that January 30th, Aaron Wall learned from a maid that Keiser had fled his McLean, Virginia home along with his wife, mother-in-law, dogs, and clothes. So Carl Lord, a Florida investigator, discovered that Keiser had several passports in several different names, links to Nazis, and a long record at European police agency Interpol. Frankly, we don't know who the hell he is really, Lord said in 1985. Kaiser was never heard from again. After he left the country, I don't believe I had another contact with him, Aaron Wald said. It is speculated that he escaped to West Germany, his lawyer, Aaron Wald said at sorry, it is speculated that he escaped from West Germany. His lawyer, Aaron Wall, said at the time that Kaiser um, Kaiser would be located but not caught, and refused to elaborate further. So Aaron Wall said at the time that Kaiser would be located but not caught. Local authorities admitted that there was little to no chance of bringing Kaiser back to Westchester. He'll never be sentenced here, Westchester County Assistant District Attorney Tony Burke said. Kaiser was fined 800 $813,000 in absentia, an amount Delaney said was intended to make sure he stayed out of the country and keep him from committing more fraud. The story ends with an odd footnote. Aaron Wald recalled that Kaiser's Virginia home, which he called a very lovely house, went into foreclosure and was sold to pay off Kaiser's debts. And as Aaron Wald remembers, it was bought by an agent working with the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Interesting. What? That's wild. So interesting, right? Wow. Um, so interesting. So Rudy Giuliani writes a letter on his behalf, and then also his home is actually sold by an FBI agent in order to pay off some of his debts. And it's assumed that he had some sort of former ex-Nazi fled to West Germany sort of ties or something like that, right? But the one thing we do know, interestingly, is if we go to here, so I'm gonna write something down real quick. So Rudy Giuliani wrote a letter on his behalf. Was taking some notes here. So his wife was named Bibi, or code name Bibi. Real name Bahira. Almost sound like that kind of sounds almost kind of like Middle Eastern, really. Bahira. And since the mother-in-law's name is Damaki, so I'm assuming maybe Barbara's name might be Damaki. Last name might be Damaki as well. So I'm just gonna write that down like that. I'm gonna say mother-in-law. So mother-in-law was Margaret. Okay. So first couple things here. I want Robert Vasco. So let's go back over here. Robert Vesco. Let's see. All right, so Robert Lee Vesco was an American criminal financier. After several years of risky investments and dubious credit dealings, Vesco was alleged to have committed securities fraud. He immediately fled the ensuing SEC investigation by living in a number of Central American and Caribbean countries. So he died in Cuba in 2007. So Vesco was notorious throughout his life, attempting to buy a Caribbean island from Antigua to create an autonomous country and having a national law in Costa Rica made to protect him from extradition. In 2001, Slate article termed Vesco the undisputed king of the fugitive financiers. After settling in Cuba during 1982, Vesco was charged with drug smuggling in 1989. During the 1990s, he was indicted by the Cuban government for fraud and illicit economic activity and president, uh, acts prejudicial to the economic plans and contracts of the state in 1996. Vesco was sentenced to 13 years of jail in Cuba. In November 2007, the New York Times reported that he had died of lung cancer at a hospital in Havana, Cuba, 5 months before, although it had been suggested that he faked his death. So Vesco was the son of a Detroit auto worker. He was born in Detroit, Michigan, where he grew up and attended and then quit Cass Technical High School. He quit engineering school during his early 20s to work for an investment company. With an $800 stake, Vesco began matching buyers and sellers in the aluminum market until he eventually acquired a portion of the profits of a floundering aluminum plant. By 1965, he could borrow enough money to acquire International Controls Corporation. Though aggressively hostile expansions and debt finance takeovers of other businesses, he increased ICC quickly. By 1968, the company owned an airline and several manufacturing plants, and Vesco had shares totaling 50 million. iOS scandal. So what? What? Okay, 1 minute. So I'm gonna say links and tried to take down Robert Vesco. So in 1970, Vesco began a successful takeover of Investors Overseas Service Limited, a mutual fund investment company with holdings of 1.5 billion, managed by financier Bernhard Kornfeld, who were in trouble with the SEC. When his company began to experience financial difficulty, no white knight was willing to get involved. Vesco saw his chance. He began a protracted battle to assume control of the company, opposed by Kornfeld and others. Kornfeld was jailed in Switzerland, and Vesco was accused of looting the company of hundreds of millions of dollars. Many prominent figures in global business, finance, and royalty were associated with the mess, receiving money from one party or the other for their endorsement. Among the accusations against Vesco were that he parked funds belonging to iOS investors in a series of dummy corporations, one of which had an Amsterdam address that was later associated with Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, and that he broke into a Swiss bank vault to obtain shares. These allegations are unproven, as Vesco fled the country and spent the next 15 years relocating between countries that lacked extradition treaties with the United States. Oof. What's up, like, jeez, what is going? I don't even know if I have like the energy to like just even get into this guy. Oh, wow. Whoa! He also knew Frank Terpil. However, reports of his death have been disputed, as his associate Frank Terpil said that he fled to Sierra Leone. Wow! So Vesco So all the city, we're getting more into the black market money laundering stuff, even more so. So Sir Ernst Keiser also tried to take down Robert Vesco, who knew Frank Terpil. Frank Terpil, and I'll say this was involved in the IOS scandal. Wow. Whew. Wow, so think about Frank Terpil even gets brought into the mix here. So maybe I gotta keep reading now. All right. So during February 1973, with criminal charges against him imminent, Vesco used the corporate jet to flee to Costa Rica, along with about 200 million worth of IOS's investments, according to SEC allegations. Vesco would continue to wage a legal battle for Costa Rica and the Bahamas to try to maintain control of his 26% of ICC stock. Um, but with 5 outstanding indictments for security fraud against him, he cannot return to the United States. It was not until 1981 that ICC had become completely free of Vesco's control after paying almost 12 million to him and his family. Okay. Wow, that's just interesting. Jeez. Now I'm gonna also write uh, Vesco links to Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands, which is kind of crazy because Prince Bernhard, I want to say, was the executor of the Bilderberg group. Jeez. So, Vesco ties to Prince Bernhard. And I want to say Prince Bernhard was also caught up in like this like big Lockheed scandal back in the day or whatnot. So wow. Man, the Cold War was crazy. It's just everybody was just living these very weird, adventurous, crazy, deceitful lives. It seems. Okay, so Nixon scandal. Among the other charges that emerged during the 1970s, the SEC accused Vesco of embezzling 220 million from 4 different IOS funds. During 1973, Vesco fled to Costa Rica. Shortly before his departure, hoping to end the SEC investigation into his activities, Vesco routed substantial contributions to Richard Nixon through Nixon's nephew, Donald A. Nixon. So wow. So interesting. So in the 1970s, Nixon was encouraged by his family to undertake a position in finance with financier Robert Vesco in Europe. While he lived in Geneva, he proved himself in overtime. He and Vesco, the chairman of a substantial organization owning banks, mutual funds, real estate, and various global entities, developed a relationship, and Nixon became Vesco's live-in assistant, later conducting business globally with businesses and governments. What? So Vesco even has ties to. So what? Vesco ties to Nixon has ties to Nixon, so that's even of itself. To Nixon and his nephew Donald Nixon. Wow, very interesting. Okay. In the mid 1990s, Nixon once again encountered Vesco, who was living in Cuba. with ties to the government. Cuba helped Nixon to create manufacturing facilities and clinical trials for an allegedly immunity boosting drug derived from the citronella based herbal remedy Virozan. The Cuban authorities initially accused Nixon of being involved in the international drug trade with Vesco, which led Nixon and Vesco's detention by government authorities in May 1995. Nixon was allowed to leave Cuba in July. Vesco was later convicted of economic crimes against the state and sentenced to 13 years. What? Wow. Okay. The Nixon family was kind of involved in some stuff too. There's something called like Burgergate or whatever, where like Howard Hughes gave Richard Nixon's brother a bunch of like money to like get a bunch of like wannabe McDonald's franchises going or something. Like it gets kind of weird because he was trying to buy like political influence with Nixon. But regardless, so Vesco was also investigated for a secret $200,000 contribution made to the 1972 campaign to re-elect Nixon as counsel um, to the International Controls Corporation. Uh, Let me see here. New Jersey lawyer Harry L. Sears delivered the contribution to Maurice Stans, finance chairman for the committee to re-elect the president. Vesco had wanted Attorney General John N. Mitchell to intercede on behalf of with SEC Chairman William J. Casey. What? This is not the same Casey. Yes, it is of the CIA. What? The world. Oh my goodness gracious. So Vesco had wanted Attorney General John N. Mitchell to intercede on his behalf with SEC Chairman William Casey. While Vesco fled the country, Stans, Mitchell, and Sears were indicted for obstruction of justice, though the charges against all three were dropped. So, wow, this Vesco guy is nuts. Let me see here. So Vesco was being investigated by William Casey, later of the CIA. Later of the CIA. What? So in Costa Rica, Vesco donated 2.1 million to the Sociedad Agricola Industrial San Cristobal SA, a company initiated by President Jose Figueres. Figueres passed a law to guarantee that Vesco would not be extradited. Figueres' constitutional term ended in 1974. Vesco remained in Cuba until 1978 when President Rodrigo Carazo repealed what was popularly referred to as Vesco's Law. During 1978, Vesco relocated to Nassau, then to Antigua. While in Nassau in the 70s, Vesco's business ties with Lyndon Pindling and Carlos Ledher, wow, of the Medellin Cartel, were subject to CIA investigations. It is believed that Bill Fairclough, ostensibly working for Coopers and Lindbrand, investigated these ties. So Cooper and Lindbrand. Oh wow, which is now PricewaterhouseCoopers. So despite Vesco's fallout with Pindling, um, He still maintained a golden gated mansion staffed by armed guards situated northeast of Nassau, close to Paradise Island, where one of his yachts was moored, as noted in the autobiographical journal Beyond Encryption by Fairclough, aka Edward Burlington. On Vesco's orders, Fairclough was drugged and kidnapped whilst at the Pink Pussycat Club on Delaney Street in Nassau. He awoke on Vesco's yacht but managed to force the yacht back to shore and escaped after having stolen a revolver from one of Vesco's guards. What is going on? This is crazy. What is going on? Wow. Lyndon Pindling. Who is this clown? Wow. Wow. So ties to Carlos Ledher, who was of the Medellin Cartel. Wow. It's all connected. I'm just baffled, man. Wow, it's all connected. Like, so while in Antigua, Vesco tried unsuccessfully to buy the sister island Barbuda and establish it as a sovereign state. The Costa Rican government refused his attempt to return in 1978 while Rodrigo Cazaro was president. During 1982, Vesco tried again to return to Costa Rica, but President Luis A. Mong denied his entry. He lived in Nicaragua for a while the Sandinista government was in power. So he's also kind of now in the Iran Contra stuff, right? So each of these countries accepted him, hoping that his great wealth would finance local development projects. However, this worked badly for everyone involved, although Vesco was reputed to have stolen more than 200 million and appeared several times on the Forbes list of wealthiest people in the world. So the Nixon scandal part two. While during 1982 he relocated to Cuba, a country that could have provided him with treatment of his painful urinary tract infections and would not extradite him to the United States, and would not extradite him to the U.S. Cuban authorities. Man, sorry. During the 1982, he relocated to Cuba, a country that could provide him with treatment for his painful urinary tract infections and would not extradite him to the U.S. Cuban authorities accepted him on the condition that he not become involved in any financial deals. He married Lydia Alfonso Iager. Vesco was indicted during 1989 on drug smuggling charges. So during the 1990s, Vesco became involved once again with Donald Nixon after Nixon went to Cuba seeking to partner with the government in conducting clinical trials on a substance called triexolon, or TX, which he claimed boosted the immune system. Vesco introduced Nixon to Fidel Castro and his brother Raul Castro, and the Cuban government agreed to provide laboratory facilities and doctors to conduct the trials. Results from the studies were claimed to be positive. In Cuba, Vesco joined forces with rogue former CIA operative Frank Terpil, and they offered their network of contacts to the Cuban government. Interesting. So, on or about May 31st, 1995, Vesco attempted to defraud Nixon and Raul Castro, and the Cuban authorities seized control of the project and arrested Vesco, his wife, and Terpil. at this time, like Terpil is a sociopath, man. Like wow, I'm just going to leave it there. At the time of Vesco's arrest, the Cuban Foreign Ministry said he had been taken into custody under suspicion of being a provocateur and an agent of foreign special services or intelligence agencies. However, he was formally charged with fraud and illicit economic activity and acts prejudicial to the economic plans and contracts of the state. During 1996, the Cuban government sentenced Vesco to 13 years in prison on charges resulting from the scandal. He was scheduled for release during 2009, when he would have been 74 years old. Vesco's wife Lydia was convicted on lesser charges and was released in 2005. So Vesco reportedly died of lung cancer in November 2007 and was buried in Colón Cemetery in Havana. However, reports of his death have been disputed, as his associate Frank Terpil said he fled to Sierra Leone. So, in popular culture, a fictionalized version of Vesco is featured prominently in a six-season episode of The Blacklist titled Roberto Vesco Number 9, in which he is portrayed by Stacy Keach. The fictional Vesco is shown to have faked his own death in Cuba in 2007 and to be in pursuit of a legendary shipwreck from the Spanish treasure fleet. Another fictionalized version of Vesco was featured in the 1980 movie The Return of Frank Cannon, intended as a possible reboot pilot for the canceled detective series Cannon. The TV film featured an even more portly ex-private eye enjoying sedate retirement as a gourmet restaurateur and fishing charter boat captain until he is lured by a still fetching old flame from his presumably less obese post-World War II Army days back into hefty gumshoe action to solve the murder of her husband, a retired CIA agent turned country horse breeder. Cannon winds up chasing down an expat similar to Vesco, played by Arthur Hill, along a still warm trail from Costa Rica back to the U.S. after he finds out the murder victim has stumbled on a plot among other retired CIA agents. Who wrote this sentence? like, geez, I feel like I'm running a marathon trying to read this. Um, so has stumbled on a plot among other retired CIA agents to smuggle the fugitive back into the U.S. following plastic surgery, where he had assumed a new identity as a dead man's inconspicuous neighborly horse vet. Ooh, okay, wow. So that's wild, man. Like now Prince Bernhard is up in this too. Like Nixon, Prince Bernhard, William Casey, Frank Terpil. I mean, this is like just a few degrees of like separation. Wow. International Controls Corporation. Interesting. All right. Well, so wow. So I guess I'm gonna have to call this video Ernest Keiser and Robert Vesco. Wow. And now we have a couple more octopus limbs stretching off of the Blonde Ghost network as I have it over here, right? So Ernest Keiser. Ernest Keiser. Actually, one thing I wanted to do was I wanted to look up that last name of his wife. All right, well, nothing really came up when I tried to look up that name, but what's interesting is that when I go back to this Robert Vesco guy, right? So it is believed that Bill Fairclough investigated these ties, despite let me see here. So despite Vesco's fallout with Pindling, who was like I guess you could think of him as the president of the Bahamas or whatnot, He still maintained a Golden Gate mansion staffed by armed guards, yada yada yada. On Vesco's orders, Ferriclo was drugged and kidnapped and taken on to his yacht or something crazy like that. But this says citation needed, so I'm not sure if that's like real. But anyways, this author, Bill Ferriclo, is a real author, and he wrote Beyond Encryption, which I guess is like one book in a series of books known as the Burlington Files. So, pretty interesting. Maybe something just to look into or whatnot. Kind of seems like an espionage sort of Cold War type book set in the Caribbean. But beyond that, I'm just going to kind of end it right there. So today's video was about Ernest Keiser, and there's no photos or anything of him. So who was Ernest Keiser? He seems to be some sort of ex-German soldier who fled to West Germany and became an international con man and also informant and snitch, trying to who took down Edwin Wilson and was also looking into Robert Vesco, and Robert Vesco had ties to Nixon, um, had degrees of ties to William Casey, former head of the CIA, even though William Casey, as the head of the SEC, was investigating Vesco. But Vesco also has ties to people like Carlos Ledher, who was a Colombian neo-Nazi in the Medellin Cartel or something like that, who was kind of the inspiration behind the crazy guy who was the partner with Johnny Depp in the Blow movies. So we basically from this Ernest Keiser guy, you can even start going deeper into like the Latin America cocaine, Nazi clandestine Operation Condor type stuff. So, it's like the whole Cold War was like this big net, and you can just keep opening up doors. And, the one way how I organize all the information is I just call it the Blonde Ghost Network. So now I know that Ernest Keiser even has ties down here to Medellin and stuff like Carlos Ledher, right? So you already had his name in here. Carlos Ledher, right? So very interesting. So I'll just end it right there. All right. Thank you. All right. Bye.